Looks like
All right. All right, ready to go? Good morning. I'd like to call this session of the Downtown Revitalization Ad Hoc Committee to order. The time is now 8:30. We are being aired on Zoom as well, and I believe we have some people in the waiting room. So I will move to public comment. Does anyone want to make any public comment? If you'd like to, please raise your hand via Zoom, and please state your name and address for the record.
I don't see anybody's up. Who's
Oh,
the
Mark
answer?
Peterson.
Mark Peterson.
Can you see them?
Yes, this is Mark Peterson, 43 Church Street. I just want to bring up that the meeting minutes for this particular committee meeting are haven't been posted since April 2024, and the video recordings are no longer on YouTube since April 2024. I think that's pretty, if you're trying to make a transparent process, not having the minutes and not having the video recordings is not helping that. Who is responsible for posting the minutes and the video recordings? So that's
I mentioned to you, Mark, that we have some catching up to do in the minutes. We'll have those to be voted on into the record at our next meeting. As far as video, I don't know if we had some technical difficulties on prior meetings on the video, so I have to get back to you on that.
And also the Vision to Reality, the downtown reports. Those weren't posted to the December town council meeting. We did find them in the town manager operational report. I'm just wondering why they're not posted to the town council meeting where they were discussed. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else have any public comment to start?
Donna Jewel has her hand up.
Hey.
Hi, good morning, Donna Jewel, 50 Keith Place, Bridgewater. I had a question about part of our process on the downtown revitalization. As some of you may know, my husband owns a business downtown. We own 3 pieces of property downtown right on the common. And I did an unofficial survey of some of the business owners around the common, and I learned that no one had been contacted for input on what makes their business successful, what is the challenge for their business, and what the town could do to help or to gain feedback from other experienced business owners downtown and property owners of what could be done to make the downtown area more attractive to them. I was quite surprised by that. I don't know if it's an issue of time, but what I'm wondering, if somebody could answer, what is the possibility of having a meeting like that? I know time is valuable for everybody, but I would be willing to step up to the plate and attempt to coordinate a meeting, or maybe we need multiple meetings. Maybe we need a daytime meeting and an evening meeting, but I'd be willing to coordinate that if I could get participation from the town. I'm sure, we're not all going to agree with everybody's input, but I think it's valuable input. There are businesses that have been there for many, many years, and there are new businesses, and they all face unique challenges. Personally, I don't want you to walk away from the impression that, we're affected by the downtown traffic study. We're actually fortunate that we're not. We have parking for both of our businesses. But I'd like to put that out there, and if you can't answer me today, I would appreciate if somebody could get back to me shortly and let me know whether that type of meeting is possible, and I will volunteer my time to help prepare that.
Dr. Perry, I can respond to that.
Please go ahead, Bob.
Throughout the last year and a half, my staff and our consultant have made numerous meetings with local downtown businesses, including Bridgewater Trophy, Restoration Coffee, the Juice Mill, Unbound Bean. We put out a survey last week directly to business owners as well as through Bridgewater Business Association, trying to get people's feedback on what they like, what they don't like. So, to suggest that we have not been reaching out to businesses is not an accurate statement. Anytime we've had community meetings, we've had flyers and posters and all the downtown businesses. I mean, quite honestly, the feedback that we've gotten initially from businesses is that people aren't happy. Not happy with leadership and not happy with the lack of progress. So as we get more of those results in, we'll share them. But we've made incredible efforts to try to engage the public. More than happy to try to organize a larger meeting with business owners. I think most of them find it difficult to meet during the day because of staffing or that they're working. And at the end of the day, they would rather go home. But so that's my response to that comment.
And I'll add to Donna that, again, that was the plan too, as well, I believe going forward, was to create some meetings with downtown business owners and building owners once the time was right. So again, that's definitely the goal of our ad hoc committee as well. And if you'd like to, be a point person, it's going to help organize that. We were also looking at through the BBA. Again, we'll keep all those options open.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Early, may I ask why we weren't part of that outreach with 3 pieces of property and 2 businesses?
I mean, I think what my staff did was went to businesses that were open. They didn't, it was just a walking tour. As I said, they went to Bridgewater Trophy, they've been to the floral shop. They tried to hit people when they were open. I don't think there was any organized attempt not to engage people. I mean, our goal is to engage as many people as we can. That's wasn't intentional, but I mean, again, I think that, if you talk to people at Restaurate, if you talk to those businesses that are active in the downtown area, Just Desserts, Greyhound, we've been to all of those businesses and we'll continue to. I mean, and if you would like to have, a one-on-one, Donna, we can do that as well.
I'm more concerned about the downtown businesses around the common in total, and I don't want to get into a debate. I don't think this is a type of meeting for that, but I have also talked to a few of the businesses that you mentioned, and they don't recall any outreach. So let's try to fix that. That's all I'll say.
Thank you, Donna. Anybody else like to speak?
Evie DeLutis has her hand up.
Good morning. I'm thrilled to be able to participate as a Zoom.
Could you just give your name and address for the record, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, 70 College Road, right here in Bridgewater. I am thrilled to be able to participate as a homebound person. I have not been, and many others of us have not been able to participate in all of the other previous presentations due to the fact that we are homebound or eldered or disabled. And I have been asking for Zoom for quite a while now, and I'm glad to see it here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Evie. Anybody else like to raise a hand?
I got another comment. This is Mark Peterson, 43 Church Street.
Sure.
So when you do reach out to businesses, can you and your staff keep a log of the businesses that you reached out to and the times and the dates that you do it?
I'm sure that we have it. I mean, I'd be curious as to what businesses said we haven't been reaching out to them.
Sure. Would that be available through a public records request?
I think when Nicole's back from vacation, you can just ask for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else?
I do not see anybody else's hand, Dr. Perry.
All right, thank you, Debbie. All right, so we'll end public comment for this particular session. We'll move on to our items for discussion, which the main topic today is discussion of downtown redevelopment project. I know we have a PowerPoint presentation through Mr. Rulli, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Rulli.
Thank you, Dr. Perry, and thank you everyone for being here. This might be a little bit of a sobering presentation, but it needs to be. So again, these are all of the elements that make up vision to reality. I've used this slide many times in presentations. And I talk about that, their interrelationship between all of those. Housing doesn't exist without transportation. Small business doesn't exist without economic development. All of these things are things that we are touching upon and that we're working on. People may not necessarily see it because a lot of things happen behind the scenes and they're not necessarily ready for prime time, but they're happening. Infrastructure is a primary concern that I have both for now and in the future. And I'm going to stress that a little bit more on the next slide. So I've shared this slide before, and I guess my question to council members are, we have these numbers, which are coming due this year and in the next 3 fiscal years. And, I've talked about the need to expand the tax base. And we have some projects that are in the pipeline, and there's a fair amount of pushback from the community with respect to those. And I'll talk about that as we get into the presentation. But I guess my question to the council is, how are we paying for these things without expanding the tax base?
Gotta be very difficult, Bob.
Well, I mean, I think that, and I don't intend to be disrespectful at all, Dr. Perry, but, it's a big part of what we do, understanding infrastructure capacity. And, we have a lot of people saying no, but these are realities. I mean, with respect to sewer, we're under a consent order from the EPA that we don't get to negotiate delaying those things or putting off those things. So without, you're looking at, having to go to an exclusion, potentially as early as next year. That doesn't take into consideration schools, doesn't take into consideration other public improvements. But if we don't expand the tax base, I don't know how you pay for these things. I would say that the pipeline of federal money is going to be difficult for the next 4 years. And I don't know how to do my job if we don't expand the tax base. And, I think we've done a good job of raising awareness what the interconnection of all these things are. But, there seems to be hesitancy to expand the tax base. I mean, we hear things like, things are too big, things are going to be too busy. When we looked at, and I've shared this as well, when we look at what the potential for new development is and the tax revenue that it can bring in and the ability for the town to do a DIF, a downtown improvement fund, so we can pay for some of these things. Well, we need to do this new development in order to pay for these things because the exclusion that you would need, and it probably wouldn't be a one-time exclusion. It's going to be a several-year exclusion. And I'm not quite sure how the public is going to respond to that or, how you are as elected officials are going to present that because there are ways to avoid that, but we need support in order for the things that we're doing in order to have a chance to avoid those things. So I want to talk a little bit about, how.
Just a second before you move on, Councilman Lindy had a question.
On the debt exclusion or the Prop 2.5, I'm hearing a lot of right now rumors, and I'm looking forward to the school department coming to our joint meeting in early February. I'm hearing potential override. I haven't lived here long enough to know what all the overrides have happened in the past, but I know we've just done 3 debt exclusions in a row. And I personally think the taxpayers can only bear so much, especially the seniors. I don't know what the answer is, Bob. I do agree with you 100%, though, that the next 4 years, Massachusetts is going to be probably 50 out of 50, with our entire delegation being a different party from the current party. So I don't know. And the whole idea, it's like the chicken and egg argument. You need the infrastructure for the development, and you hope that some of those developers can pay for some of those infrastructure costs. But if you don't have the infrastructure, you can't have the development. It's this big round circle. And I don't know what the solution is. If I did, I probably would be a highly paid consultant.
Well, correct. And thank you, Mark. I mean, the numbers that I put up are not taking into consideration any expansion of the infrastructure or any new development. Those are costs that we have today. So there's no opportunity, without new development to ask anybody other than the taxpayers to pay those bills. And that's my point, is that we're not going to attract new development, unless we show that, we have a plan to address infrastructure capacity, because the public rightly has concerns, over their ability to have potable water. We are looking at alternatives in terms of capacity for both water and sewer, but those things don't happen overnight. The planning and the design and the financing, those are 4 or 5 year projects that, we've initiated those conversations. We have people in Boston engaged in those conversations now, but it's a process. But, again, I'm just, I'm at kind of at a crossroads as to, what do we do? So let me just talk a little bit about commercial development financing, because this isn't as simple as putting a mortgage or a second mortgage on a residential piece of property. There are many components to that. And I can tell you that the economic environment for commercial development right now is difficult. Our commercial banks in the area are beginning to feel the hangover of what happened to the office market as a result of COVID. Many of these banks have been able to carry underperforming assets on their books as performing assets, but now they're having to write those assets down. When they have to do that, that reduces their ability to lend money. And we've already seen that with some local banks last year, that they weren't able to lend any more money on large commercial projects because they had hit their debt limit. So when we look at commercial projects, what we refer to as what's called the capital stack. You have your senior debt, which is your first mortgage. You might have subordinate debt, and then you have preferred equity and common equity. What we're seeing in commercial real estate right now is it's very difficult to get senior debt, or get senior debt at a level that is not going to force you into the private equity market. Private equity is the #1 growing area in finance right now. Because the interest rates are high and the returns are high for those people in the private equity field, because their underwriting requirements are a lot less stringent than a bank, because private equity is not regulated. So the key financial standards in any kind of commercial loan are debt service coverage ratio, which is NOI divided by the annual debt obligation. Prior to COVID and prior to the environment we are in now, we would typically see debt service coverage ratios of 0.85. In the current market we're in right now, we are seeing debt service coverage ratios of 1.25 to 1.3. The second component is loan to value ratio, which is the total loan amount versus what the property value is, and then capitalization rates. So I just want to talk briefly about each of these. So debt service coverage ratio, that's a measurement of the firm's available cash flow to pay current debt obligations. Very important. So when something moves from 0.85 to 1.3, that means that there is a lot more difficulty in terms of making cash flow and work for the developer. Net operating income in commercial real estate is the key financial metric that represents the profitability of an income generating property after accounting for all operating expenses, but before taxes, mortgage payments, and capital expenditures. It reflects the amount of income the property generates from its core operations. And why is NOI important? I'm not going to read all of these. It impacts property valuation, the investment performance, the loan underwriting, and the cash flow projections. These are all things that commercial lenders, typical banks, look at. Private equity may not look at all of these as closely as a commercial bank, but all of these things are taken into consideration when a developer is bringing a project forward. A loan to value ratio, that's the financial ratio that compares the amount of money being borrowed to the market price of the asset being purchased. And that's calculated by dividing the loan amount by the lender assessed value of the property. Generally speaking, most lenders consider a loan value ratio of 80% or more as being risky. So I've heard comments over the last year that people are overpaying for properties. That's just a function of where the economy is. I think anybody that has owned property in Bridgewater for at least 10 years has seen a significant increase in the value of their property, not the assessed value, but what the fair market value of their property is. Right now, Bridgewater has some of the highest median home prices in the region. Does that mean that that's really what the property is worth? No, that's what the market is. So it's no different for commercial properties. And then capitalization rate. This is probably the most important thing that in the commercial market, what people look at. This is the expected rate of return on a real estate investment. It's a metric used to evaluate the return of investment of a property. It represents the rate of return expected on the investment property and the income that the property is anticipated to generate. And again, why are these important? Because it is a snapshot into the investment performance. It tells you what the risk assessment is. It gives you an idea of what the valuation is. It lets lenders look at comparing that investment to other investments, and it impacts the financial decisions that lenders, whether they be commercial or private equity, are going to make. As I said, a higher cap rate indicates a higher return, but potentially higher risk. Lower cap rates suggest lower risk, but a lower return. So cap rates vary based on location, property type, and market conditions. And then we also throw into the mix what are soft costs. So these are all costs that people don't see that are impacting the financial viability of a development. And these impact NOI. So you have architectural fees, engineering fees, design fees, all these soft costs that you don't see. These are typically all costs that a developer will incur before shovel even goes in ground. So at the time that they're incurring these costs, they're not generating any income. And perhaps lenders do not like to finance soft costs because there's nothing to peel back if for whatever reason the borrower went into default. And then hard costs are a little bit more obvious. These are the costs of construction, the site work, the paving, HVAC. As we say in the development community, the most expensive aspect of any new development is parking, because parking doesn't make you any money.
Bob,
Yes.
just one quick thing, just so that people fully understand. Some of those soft costs and hard costs that you were just talking about cannot be done until the person purchases the property either. So
That's
there are
correct.
those things that people walk into a project with, lack of a better word, optimism. That certain things will work out in their favor based on the disclosures that they've been given or the things that they're able to potentially pay for in those softer hard costs. But ultimately, there are quite a few things, whether it's permitting or anything like that, that do come after the fact. So I do want people to understand that those costs aren't always known prior to acquiring an actual property.
Thank you, Sonia.
Welcome.
So we did last year adopt a zoning amendment, and that put us in compliance with the MBTA communities. There was a recent op-ed in the Worcester Telegram Gazette over the weekend championing Bridgewater for being ahead of the curve in terms of how we were looking at zoning. But I'll be the first to admit I didn't get everything in there that I wanted. And there was compromises from my standpoint that were made because it was important that we got that legislation approved and we were in compliance with the state law. The overreaching intent of the CDBR was as stated here. But I would be the first to admit there needs to be tweaks that need to be made because the economic realities are going to require that. So I know there's been a lot of discussion with respect to the friendly site and the proposed project that's there, that it's too big, that it doesn't meet the existing zoning. That's correct. But I mean, I would say the existing zoning is flawed when we say that you can't have a building more than 6,000 square feet when we have an abandoned bowling alley that is over 7,000 square feet there. The economic realities of all of the things that I talked about, kind of dictate what a developer needs to do to make the deal pencil out. And agreed that as the zoning is written now, this proposed project exceeds that. But that doesn't mean that it can't get approved and that a variance can't be given. Mass general law creates the opportunities and the standards for granting a variance, and they're conjunctive. They don't operate independently. And I would argue that all of the tests to grant a variance to allow a project to go forward that exceed, and I'm not saying exactly as it was presented, but there is no way that anyone is going to be able to finance a building that's only 6,000 square feet on a land purchase that exceeded $2 million. It just doesn't work. And I don't think anyone here would do it themselves. So I think there is opportunities to think out of the box and work with the developer, but to just say no because it doesn't meet zoning, I disagree. And I think that, case law would prove out, and then, the developer needs to make that decision. But I want to go back to the fact that if we don't do new development and we don't expand the tax base, then I don't know how you're paying for the things you need to pay for. So I just want to, I've mentioned this at numerous meetings, not a comfortable conversation to have. I don't believe anyone and everyone is going to agree with me, but I've been doing this a long time. As I've said on the record often, I asked the first question I ever asked before I even considered taking the job was, where was the town with respect to infrastructure? And shame on me for not doing more due diligence to peel back the onion to see where you're at. But again, the bill that you have coming due doesn't take into consideration any new development. So if we were, we can't ask developers to pay for something that doesn't exist. And that doesn't even take into consideration that we have exorbitant utility hookup fees now. That is, that's another soft cost that can severely impact the financial viability of new development. So that's all I have. I guess, asking you all, what do you want to do? Where do we go? We have good developments, that not everyone's going to like them, but there's not a lot of people showing up in support of it. I certainly respect those people that disagree, and I applaud them for showing up. But if we want to see things happen, we need to do a better job getting out, supporting some of these projects and understanding, how hard it is to get a deal done. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions or listen to any comments that anyone might have.
So I'll turn over to either one of you guys. Have any questions or comments? Mr.
I'd like to
Lindy?
have a copy of the presentation.
Yeah,
And I'd
yeah,
like to have it, if possible, going forward before the meeting rather than at the meeting.
sure, that's fine. Can we get a copy of your
I think
presentation?
Shane has those there, and I appreciate Mr. Lindy's comments of having it before, but sometimes I don't like to give the quiz out before I give the quiz.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. Any other questions?
Not at
Bob?
the moment.
Okay, Sonia, any questions?
I think my biggest question for you, Bob, is where do you see, and I know you said this would be a sobering conversation, outside of exclusions and Prop 2.5s, can you really shed some true light reality on what a lack of vision to reality would look like for the town of Bridgewater long term? I think sometimes we have to say it as bluntly as we need to, but without all of the things that we know are coming due, being paid for by the current tax base, could you just enlighten people on what you potentially foreshadow as the true reality of the matter? Just so
I-
people really
I think you just need to drive around downtown and the central business district now. You haven't seen any significant reinvestment or redevelopment. Some of that had to do with zoning, but I think what I hear from the development community is that Bridgewater had long had a reputation of being anti-development. I think since we have started Vision Reality, we have interest from the development community. But I mean, I think that unless you create an environment that's going to welcome the development community, and that's not, saying that you let them do whatever they want to do. I mean, we're not saying that at all. The form-based code wasn't designed to do that, but I think we have to admit that it might be in some areas too restrictive. At the end of the day, the economics drive anything that we do, whether you're just a single consumer. I mean, a lot of people, over the last 2 days, what's their number one concern nationally? Inflation. Well, inflation's low, but the cost of living is high. So, I mean, that impacts everything. And we're already seeing that before, the cost of materials have gone up. Just the suggestion that there might be tariffs in October and November, drove up the prices already by 7 to 8% for hard goods for construction. All of those things impact development. So if you don't create an environment that a developer can at least break even, then you're going to see more of what you have now. And that's not to disparage what we have, but some of the initial responses that we got back from some business owners they're kind of disgusted that nothing is happening, and that they hear a lot, but they're not seeing a lot. And some of those expectations are unfounded because if we approved a project at the Broad Street site today, that doesn't mean it's going to be built tomorrow. It's a process, but I think there's frustration from the business community in terms of where things are at. I know that there's frustration from the university that downtown and its appearance and the lack of housing presents challenges for them in terms of being able to attract staff and faculty. So I mean, it's change happens whether you like it or not. It's just whether you want to be on the proactive side of change or the reactive side. I've always taken the position I want to be on the proactive side, and that's why we came forth with Vision to Reality. People outside of Bridgewater, professionals, political leaders at the state level are applauding Bridgewater for having the vision to be, have a plan that's all encompassing. But yet the pushback that my office gets and what we're hearing downtown and in Bridgewater is something completely contrary. So if this isn't, and again, the last point I'll make is that variances, the biggest thing that variances can be based on is that they're consistent with what the community's comprehensive plan is. The comprehensive plan talks all about, wanting to create housing, create opportunities for economic expansion. There's a whole section in the comprehensive master plan that talks about Broad Street. So, I mean, I would argue that a project at the Friendly site, which has sat there for 10 years, is a good thing. But if this doesn't go forward, then I think you're going to be looking at that, for an extended period of time. So, I mean, again, if there's a different way to do that, and I'm not smart enough to recognize that, I'm happy to hear how that gets done. So,
Thank you,
long
Bob.
answer to your short question, Sonia. I'm sorry.
No, thank you.
Mr. Lindy had a question.
So we just passed a form-based code, is it 9 months ago, something like that? There were certain requirements in the form-based code that were written, by CED, gone through the council, the economic development director. You got to admit, though, that 6,000 square feet to 21,000 square feet is an incredible variance. It's a lot. I'm looking for responsible business development. My constituents have told me they do want to see something done with the property, but it's a complete and total change of what it was. I just think we need to be really careful. And if we're going to pass rules and then right after we pass them, we're going to tweak them, I think it's a major tweak. And
Yeah, and I'm not, Mr. Lindy, I'm not suggesting that the 21,000 square feet is the right number. What I'm suggesting is that, I mean, we should encourage the developer to say, okay, what else can we do there? But we shouldn't just say, if it's not 6,000, we're not going to do it, because
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I took a drive over the weekend over to Target in Easton off of 106. There's a beautiful development that Avalon put in there that there are 3 stories, there's cars underneath, it's nice colors. It doesn't look anything like that project. Okay, I like what they did with McElwain School. They fixed up a historic structure behind it. They built another structure. It's okay. We got these 2 huge buildings sitting in the center of town that are decaying, storage facilities. If it were me and we wanted to put up humongous projects, I'd find a way to get those things torn down and put them there, right next to the railroad tracks. Okay, I think Broad Street is, the bigger you build it, the more of a nightmare it is. I don't live in the neighborhood behind me. And there was one resident, I'll say that, at the hearing, the zoning board of appeals, that lived in the neighborhood, that's in a butter, that likes the project. The rest of the folks that I talked to when I went around don't like the project. So we gotta come in someplace in between. If it's 6,000 to 21, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 12, I don't know. To hear about, oh gee, all of a sudden we found topography changes, I gotta say, I think the owner probably knew that when they bought the property, okay? And I don't want to keep changing things. We just did it. It's the first project out of the box. The minute we change it, it's just gonna be a revolving door. That's just what I think.
Go back to Ms. Driggles.
I do think there's something to be said, though, that I wasn't on council at the time, so I can't speak for fellow councilors. Some are not with us anymore, some are. And if it was to be looked at that the old bowling alley is already above what was allowed, I think that there is room to improve our own bookkeeping skills of making sure that pre-existing buildings that are sound, that this individual potentially wants to refurbish because it will be to their economical benefit. I do think that at minimum, it should match things that are already standing. And it's 1,000 square foot discrepancy right off the bat based on that building. So I do think there is room to look at the form-based code and get in alignment with businesses and buildings that we currently have that need improvement, that would technically be grandfathered in based on their size. But I think we need to be fair, uniformity speaking. We can't necessarily say 6,000 right next door when that building's 1,000 square foot bigger, and the new one will likely cost a whole lot more to construct based on lumber costs.
That building's off the table. They're not building the restaurant. They pulled it from the project. So in that project, that would have been grandfathered in as an old building. While I agree with you in thought, 7,000 is a lot different than 21,000. So if we're gonna do something, we need to do something in between.
Bob, my question to you, I mean, I listened to that zoning board meeting as well. I mean, I saw a number of people in favor. I see a number of people against. It seemed to be 50-50 down the middle. I obviously know that the ZBA, as well as planning, are concerned with setting precedents that might set them up for problems down the line as well. And again, this is the first project out of the box for form-based code. What are your suggestions? Do we need to relook at some of the numbers of this and propose some amendments to make it more workable, so that if a variance is needed, it's not as extreme as what we're looking at here for this project? What are your recommendations when it comes to what we've established here with the form-based code?
I definitely think there needs to be amendments, and again, there was compromises and negotiations made throughout the process. We wanted 6 stories in some locations with a commitment for affordable housing or developer contributions. We acquiesced on that. I think as soon as it was approved, my staff and I knew that we needed to make amendments. And again, I'm not suggesting that 21 is the magic number. And again, whether that project goes forward or not, what I'm suggesting is we need to relook at how realistic it is for development on the Broad Street corridor closer to downtown in terms of what can get done. If you're paying, over $400 a square foot for dirt, and you're going to spend another $450 to $550 to go vertical, it's going to be difficult to get something to pencil out. You need some, ability to make a project break even and for a lender to want to do a project. I mean, I'm familiar with the Target in Avalon, but those are big projects. And I think that, if we look at what was approved at the Perkins Foundry, that predated the form-based code, but that represents what we think the form-based code could get. That is not what was approved, is not what that developer initially proposed. We worked with that developer to redesign that project. That was an opportunity where we got two things from it. We got a commitment to have 10% of those units be affordable, and we got a cash contribution to reinvest wherever the town wants into infrastructure or pedestrian or traffic improvement. So we have that ability, but if a deal doesn't pencil out, we don't have the ability to ask for anything. So, I mean, I think, yes, we definitely need to make some tweaks to that. And that would be a process that, we'll come back to you, and then we'll work with the planning board in order to make those things happen. But, I think in my experience, planning boards, zoning boards, and even town councils have never gotten into the economics of what makes projects good projects or bad projects. And some of that had to do with that the economy was just chugging along. Well, it's not anymore. And it's incredibly difficult to get projects. I mean, the number of emails that I get from people like, can you just get a Trader Joe's? Can you? And I mean, if Trader Joe's wanted to be in Bridgewater, they'd be in Bridgewater. Those people have better census data than the United States Census Bureau, but we don't have that environment right now. So all I'm asking is that we keep an open mind in terms of making some compromises to get what we need. But again, I go back to, this isn't because I want to help the developer. I want to help the community. I go back to who's paying for the infrastructure.
I agree with you, Bob, and we definitely had these projects on tap to help that situation on out. And without the help of those projects, it's, like you say, going to be difficult to meet the numbers needed to improve the infrastructure. And for those at home, just to reiterate, I mean, I know there's been some questions too, even with these projects potentially coming online. The ability for these projects to have the infrastructure that they need. Can you just speak briefly to the capacity of our current water and sewer to support these projects that are on the table?
Yeah, I think right now, we have identified what we saw to be 6 large underutilized sites for redevelopment. Perkins Foundry being one of them that's approved. They're just waiting for the final state environmental sign off. Then we have the Broad Street site, and that the university and the state, I believe in, if not the end of the first quarter of this year, the beginning of the second quarter of this year, is going to be putting out an RFQ for the redevelopment of the corner of Hale and Plymouth Street. Right now, we have sufficient capacity to see what's on the table, have infrastructure capacity. But, as I said often, we, for the last year, have tried to engage with the state with respect to redirecting wastewater to the Department of Corrections. And we're investigating options with respect to alternative sources of water and/or finding the funding to drop 2 new wells off of Vernon Street, which is pretty expensive because it's going to require that we potentially build a new treatment plant, because that is not coming from the aquifer, that's coming from bedrock, and that water gets treated differently. But they're all large capital projects, whatever they are. I think one advantage that we have right now is with the state looking at the redevelopment of the Hale Plymouth Street site. The governor has also, put forth a request that all the universities look at underutilized properties that they have for redevelopment for housing. As we all know, Bridgewater State has more property besides what we see on campus, particularly behind Great Hill. In my recent meetings with the state and DCAM specifically, um, I've made it very clear. We're supportive of new development, but you have to help us on the water and sewer issue. And they acknowledge that. So having them bring the people that need to be at the table to the table is something that's happening. Using the leverage that the university has to bring those people to the table is happening. But it's government. Government doesn't move fast, and but we are having those conversations. I mean, arguably, we should have had those conversations 10 years ago, but we are where we are. But again, I think we're making progress. I mean, the fact that we are able to have a productive meeting recently on traffic and pedestrian improvements in Central Square, all those things are happening. I mean, people may not see them happening, but those all take 5 years at best. But right now, if all the projects that we see on the table, I mean, we could service them, but I would be really, hesitant to promote much more than that right now until we know that we have alternatives. And I don't think we would be able to, I mean, and I think, the development community, I mean, that's the first question, one of the first questions they ask, what's your capacity? Can I do this? I mean, I'm not gonna, as Sonia said, that, developers take some risk. They're in that business. That's why they get rewarded for the risk they take, but they'll incur costs before they put any contracts together. And, that's at their risk. I mean, that's their due diligence, but, they're asking questions. What's the tax rate? What's the support for development? What's your infrastructure capacity? That's why I asked the question before I took the position. It's, we're at a crossroads where doing nothing is not a very good option right now. So again, long answer to your short question. I apologize.
Not a problem, Bob. Mr.
I'm just thinking out loud, just a quick thought. Maybe a good way to deal with this and tackle this is to do a joint meeting between the CED committee of the council and this group with Bob, kind of a planning strategy, like, gee, what can we do to make it meet someplace in between? And then maybe include some folks like planning board and ZBA, like the chair of those two groups, or a designated member or something. I mean, the financial issue is completely separate. I mean, it matters, but just kind of a workshop.
Potential workshop of some sort might be something, again, just looking at the overall setup of the form-based code and what the tweaks would be to make it more streamlined, so a project going forward has all its need and hopefully not the need for any variances. But something like that certainly might be the way to go to figure out what needs to be tweaked or improved. But that being said, yeah, we'll have to see what we can probably come up with, and I'll have a conversation with Bob. Maybe it's something we can get set up in the very near future.
I mean, I've suggested that often, that we have some kind of joint workshop. I mean, I would suggest that, we broaden that conversation to not necessarily bring in developers that have a project in front of us, but, bring in people from the commercial lending fields. Just, I mean, just so, it's not my point of view. You can hear from them what the constraints they have, but also hear from, what are developers looking for, and, what are some of the difficulties they have. I think that, I tell people all the time, the biggest part of our job is education, education, education. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but I think there's a lot, once you start peeling back the onion on commercial development, there's a lot of layers there that I don't expect the public to understand those. But it's not as simple as, well, they paid too much for the land, or that's too big. Well, there's a reason for, and again, that's not, that's just in general. But the economic realities are what are going to make things work or not work. No different than, the budget for the town. When you're looking at what your capital expenditures are, there's a reality of what can you afford.
Sure. Any further questions from the counselor? I don't have anything else further for now, Bob. Like I said, we'll just have to have a discussion, maybe setting up this potential workshop in the near future. But I appreciate your presentation, and we'll see what we can do as an ad hoc committee as well as the council to continue to move things forward for the town.
And we will post the present. I mean, if Shane didn't give you copies, we'll get you copies, but we'll post the presentation on the CED website.
Okay, excellent, very good. Okay, so that being that, agenda-wise, we don't have any post comments on the agenda, so we'll just ask for basically adjournment of the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
And second it, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you,
And
everyone.
Thank you, Bob. We
Thanks,
are
Bob.
adjournment. Thank you for coming.